like definitely, I think everyone, and that's the way the RF works, you're training, like you remember from officer training, you train, say, 100 officers, technically all be told you are the leader. But then it's like, well, there's only, say, 4 teams that maybe on that squadron, so you can't have 100 leaders trying to lead 4 teams. You have to have people who, can follow sometimes, and they'll clearly be better leaders than there'll be other people. We all see, I think, people in everyday walk of life, that guy's a natural leader, just without even doing anything, he could just lead anyone around.
Welcome to the How They Lead podcast, hosted by Benjamin Wade and Ben Stocker. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of high performance, showcasing examples of how individuals and teams can reach their full potential.
Together, they'll be inviting amazing guests who have defined or represented high performance in their own right, from world record breakers to individuals who have achieved first in their fields. The How They Lead podcast will showcase a diverse range of guests, each with their unique stories and insights to share. So join us as we challenge traditional ways of doing things, explore new ideas, methods and possibilities, and evolve the way people perform. Patrick Kershaw, thanks very much for joining us. This is one of our first few podcasts, the How They Lead podcast. We're inviting influential key people from high-performing teams from around the world to join us and have an open and honest and frank conversation about how they lead or how they've been led, so that our listeners can use this as a free resource to tap into and understand how they could better themselves as individuals or within a business or within a team. Today we've tapped into the Red Arrows, Patrick Kershaw, fresh from flying a sortie, I believe, earlier in the day. He's joined us from his hotel room. So we're going to hear a little bit more about the Red Arrows and the high performance that they achieve and how they achieve it. We did our very first sort of sorties, flying training together, following our commissioned officers training at Cranwell quite some time ago, back in early 2000s. And we'll probably hear a little bit more about your training from then and how you've ended up in the Royal Air Force Aerobatics display team. Ben, did you want to run a bit of an intro?
Yeah, sure. I just want to be clear that when you say we, it wasn't we, it was these two.
Well,
so I've got no flying experience at all. So Patrick, when you're sharing your stories, you're gonna have to just kind of dumb them down for a rugby player who never quite made it into the skies. But Patrick, thank you very much. I get the pleasure and the honor of asking you our very first question. You've got 1 sentence to answer this question. The question is, in 1 sentence, describe what your day-to-day approach is to leading people.
Simply for me is treat others how I'd want to be treated if I was being led.
Full stop. Easy, succinct. Can you give me an example of a role model? Like, where is that very grounded, solid? You seem very confident in that answer. So where is that come from?
Well, for me, actually, we get asked when we join the team, who are our role models, people we look up to, all that kind of stuff. And it's really easy. And I think in my interview for the team, I think I picked someone like Tim Peake, and it's really easy to kind of go with someone who is quite well known in the public domain. But actually, when I kind of sat down and thought about it, I thought, who actually are my role models? And it was day-to-day people that I was working for. So there are, in the RAF, I'm a flight lieutenant. Above me, there are squadron leaders, so they're flight commanders, so they kind of help run the squadron, and then there's a squadron commander who's a wing commander. And it was really those people who, if it was in the kind of officer style leadership, it was those people who were kind of that one up from me. Like, how did they lead? What did they do? And a big thing we do in the way we train, not necessarily just on the Reds, but on frontline fighter pilot flying, is we look at, what happened, why it happened, and how do we fix it. And so if I saw someone leading something and it was something good, I kind of try and take lessons from that. But if it was something bad, try and take away what happened, why it happened, and how would I do that differently. And so I started to kind of pick up role models, both almost negative and positive role models. Negative ones who I'd see that I think I don't want to be a leader like that person's a leader. I want to be a leader like the other person. And so I kind of started to try and, when things would happen, and be that, situations where we're on operational missions and you've got people who are leading the formation, on potentially big high profile missions. And how did that person do what they did? How did they deal with something that didn't go quite according to plan? And how did they approach that situation? So those are the kind of role models really that I would use. And that would be through, a key thing I'd like to go through training of what those people would be like as instructors. I think then back when I went back to being an instructor, what were my instructors like? What did I like about those instructors? What didn't I like? What would I do differently? And how did I feel when people maybe treated me in a poor way? And so I'd take that stuff, and then when I got to the front line, became frontline fighter pilot. Again, it was the people around me, those people who were maybe a year or two ahead of me or further afield. Like, what were they doing? How did they do it? What could I learn from them? Or in a good way or in a bad way, to take away and think, okay, I'm not going to be that kind of leader, and kind of always looking at myself, really kind of self-assessment as to, how I do that first and foremost before really kind of looking at other people for that.
Just a follow-up question on that, because that concept of treating people how you like to be treated, or how you'd want to be treated, as a way of leading other people, and I completely get that. Looking at positive role models and role models where people have done things that actually maybe aren't quite kind of in line with your North Star, and bouncing your route up between the two. When you've been in operational environments or high stakes environments, how does that treat someone like you want to be treated to? How does that play out when stresses are high, stakes are high? How do you tap into that rather than kind of let the over arousal lead to different type of reaction?
I think the big thing really is within the RAF, we have kind of a culture plays a big part of it. So we have a thing called what's called a just culture. So that kind of underpins everything. And that's trying to basically say that ultimately everyone's a human, everyone makes mistakes. So it's understanding when people are doing something, no one really is going into work that day to be, perform badly. Everyone wants to do the best they can. And it's understanding that. And it's clearly there are people potentially who may be, say, reckless, malicious, etc. But ultimately, they're probably not in the type of environment or job that we do. And so it's that kind of situation where that person makes a mistake. It's again, how would I like to treat that mistake? And it's asking why you made that mistake or they made that mistake, and how do we learn from that? And it could be ultimately it's just a lack of understanding, and that could actually then come back onto us as the instructors in that situation to say we were the ones who didn't teach that properly. Why didn't we teach that properly? Well, we didn't have a system set in place, and that kind of crosses over into that could be anything in business. It's why did that person make that mistake at work? Well, actually let's ask them and find out. Well, it turns out they weren't there for that training day. Why weren't they there for that training day? Okay, well, we didn't have a system in place to record who turned up for that training day. So actually I found it on the radar. And why did that? We didn't have a system. And again, it's okay, well, the person who used to do that system has left. Why is that person left? And you can literally go on and on and on and digging into this kind of the why and how do you fix something. And it's ultimately that kind of culture that underpins that you can ask those questions and say, and that's not saying that, it's still the military, and the military ultimately, if they, you are in a system based on rank. So you obviously, ultimately can be ordered to do things, but it's trying to get the best out of people. And there are situations which clearly, probably will call for shouting at someone in certain parts of the military. But there are other situations where, do you know what, if I raise my voice and he doesn't say that in, I have to say that again. That could be an extra radio call that I don't need to make. I can make one radio call and hopefully it's efficient as anything and does his job. If I shout it, say it too quickly, whatever it might be, I might say it 2-3 times and then we're not as efficient. So again, it's all of that kind of stuff. It's like everything we do, and especially in the Reds, it's looking at yourself. It's criticism first. So as a leader standing at the front and first of all saying, okay, I made this mistake. Why did I make that mistake? How do I fix it? And then that hopefully instilling the kind of trust and confidence into the rest of the team to put their hand up as well, because they know they can put their hand up, because they know the culture is there, that people can make mistakes. They're not going to be necessarily told off straight away if if they have to make that mistake, because you've kind of instilled that culture within your company or your group.
Yeah, I really like that approach. It's almost the 5 whys or the root cause analysis, really digging into the root cause of why something's gone wrong, rather than just a sticking plaster approach. But with the Reds, we'll go back to a proper intro shortly, but I think we'll just jump straight in there. There's some really great questions. But with the Reds, or the Red Arrows, when do you get time to really dig into things other than the flying? So I can imagine you get down, you debrief, and you go through the flying, but you just mentioned in terms of efficiencies like radio calls, when do you get time to look at the other parts that aren't flying necessarily flying related or to do with the display sequence? Because obviously that probably takes up quite a bit of your time that you potentially don't have as a team going around the world.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have our winter training, so from kind of October through till the end of May, we are training. So, for instance, today we went through some of the stuff in the display again, and clearly that's led by Red One, the team leader. And then you've got a kind of a deputy, almost team leader, the executive officer, who's currently Red 8, and then you've got the synchro leader, Red 6. So you've got these people they'll sit down together and work out a plan. But at the same time, we've got that's Red One isn't saying people can't give me ideas to how we can make the show a little bit different or a little bit better, with the smoke plan or whatever it might be. He's looking for, and that's what we did this afternoon. It was very much an open kind of, okay, how do we do this part of the show, with this situation? If we have, one less chair, how do we change that? And so he was, looking for those ideas, because again, you're looking for people to be able to say something. Now, it might not necessarily be the correct idea, and you can kind of, again, say why that won't work, instead of just saying, no, that's not going to work. But yeah, so, I mean, we literally will brief, we don't ever go fly without briefing or debriefing. So we'll brief our display, then we'll go fly the display, and then we'll debrief that display. And again, if things like it's all recorded, so you can hear the audio, the video. And if anything is incorrect in terms of the comm, then we debrief it there and then, and it's corrected. And if there's something that, again, that's the wrong comm, then we can look at maybe why it's wrong, how we change that. And that's the same in the front line as well. You will obviously debrief all that kind of stuff. Now, the front line is a lot more information, because you've obviously got computer systems and radars recording certain things. So to take all that data and then be able to process that in a certain amount of time is quite tricky. But ultimately, that's why, again, you're looking for that culture, that honesty, where people can say, put that up and say, actually, I made this mistake in this trip. So we don't need to look at the rest of this mission. But the big thing I want to really focus on is this one thing, because that went wrong. And this is why I think it went wrong. But actually, let's have a look at it and see how we fix that to stop that happening again. And for someone else to learn from that as well. Again, this isn't just, this person makes a mistake and we hide that away. It's someone may have made a mistake, but actually let's stop someone else making that mistake. And again, that goes into our culture and the safety culture we have in the Air Force. And it's the same in anything really, any kind of team. Is to, if you make a mistake in training, the thing you're going to want to do is tell other people in training that you made that mistake. If you make that mistake and you keep it to yourself, and then you lose your game at the weekend and you think, oh, well, I wish I'd said that. But maybe you didn't have a culture where you thought you could say it. So again, it's the kind of, obviously, the time and the place to be able to say, but yeah, it's definitely the kind of the whole thing we're trying to implore, because it's, again, back to that self-critique, that kind of honesty in that whole environment, because, the Hawk is, unlike the frontline aircraft, the Hawk doesn't have much in terms of the way of recording any data from the aircraft. So again, you're looking for that honesty from those pilots to be able to say, this was wrong, I made this mistake in the cockpit, that might not be picked up on the video, and then the rest of the formation can learn from that.
I think a lot of the listeners will be able to take something away from that back to the business, about how that they can create or emulate that culture, that honest feedback culture, or the non-blame culture. Is there anything you can think of in the Air Force or in the display team that enables you to do that? Something specifically that you do to allow that trust to come out, or that vulnerability for people to put their hand up and say, oh, actually, it might be a silly idea, but hey, I'll put it out there.
I mean, the trust thing is built into literally everything we do. So, a lot of our maneuvers are, like, for instance, we do one called Detonator, and I roll, so you've got Red 1, then there's Red 3, then I'm Red 5 and outside of him. And obviously on the other side, you've got Red 2 and Red 4. And basically on a command, on a voice command, we all break away from each other. And so Red 3 obviously trusts that I'm going to go to my angle of bank, because he rolls to 30 degrees angle of bank, I roll to 60. And ultimately he's trusting that I'm going to get out of the way, because that's what the maneuver is, And so there's obviously that trust there for that kind of stuff. In terms of people obviously coming forward to change things, again, it's back to that, in the debrief, there's the last part of the debrief. Does anyone have any points? And we go around each person, and it might be, okay, actually, why do we do that way? And it might be a reason that's 30 years old, but actually it could be, well, actually, yeah, let's have a look at that. Let's review that. And one thing we do, and I was chatting to someone else about this recently, a big thing we do in the RF as well is what they call a continuous improvement event. So you'll sit down and look at all your kind of practices within a squadron and say, what do we do that way? Is that efficient? Do we do it that way because people come out with that's just the way it's always been done? And you say, well, why?
Why
Yeah,
change it?
exactly. Often people don't like change, but actually to say to people, well, actually we can make this more, not as streamlined, 'cause that can be a bad word, but just maybe more efficient, and ultimately, we can kind of get things done more quickly, without doing all those other processes. Just because they've been in for 30 years doesn't mean we have to do that. So we will do that kind of stuff as well all the time. And again, that's something that a business could easily look at themselves, of the way they operate, or they do things effectively and efficiently, because often those kind of things can easily fall on the radar because people, again, get into trends, just ways of doing things, and a lot of our stuff comes from, this kind of culture comes from flying accidents, and some, major accidents like the Nimrod crash in Afghanistan in 2006. These things that basically, when they investigated that, it transpired that things just been done that way for a long period of time, and so that was kind of, again, a big change within the Ministry of Defence, was to go away and say, okay, actually, why do we do it that way? Because isn't an excuse. Let's look at how we can change that and make ourselves more efficient. And ultimately, like everything we do is to be as safe as we can be, which is what is at the forefront of all our flying and displays.
Yeah, it's normally music to our ears when we hear a client say, why would you want to change it? It's always been done like that. So, perfect. There's probably quite a lot we can look at to see if we could make a change then, and some efficiencies to be made.
Yeah.
One thing you just mentioned that would be really interesting just to hear, in terms of that sort of gradient between the display team and the pilots, and quite imposing red suits, and then you get sort of the engineers and all the support crew, which are vital to the display. Do you ever feel that there's a reluctance to say something because of that? Not a divide, but actually the pilots are probably the crux of the display team. Does everyone else feel that they're in a supporting role and might not necessarily be able to or want to put their hands up? Or do those squadron-wide events actually mean that the pilots are quite vulnerable and open to ideas, and it brings everyone onto a level playing field?
And I think everyone I think what I've seen so far in the past few, my past few tours within the RF, is that people do try and speak up if they see something that's wrong. And again, there's a process that they can do. They can put in a confidential anonymous report to say that, this is unsafe, or I've seen this, and it could be, something as minor as anything. Because again, that one person hopefully puts that in. Someone else might say, oh yeah, I saw that as well, and straight away you found something out that you weren't aware of. And it's, again, back to that culture of having people, if they do put their hand up and say something, and you go, well, actually, that isn't what you think it is. It's you're kind of worried about nothing, but they potentially highlight something that could be a serious issue. So I don't think there's reluctance from people necessarily in the engineering body not to say anything. Again, we've got senior engineers. There's a rank structure there, so again, they can pass things up the rank chain if they want to. But I think ultimately everyone's quite open to that kind of improvement. Notwithstanding the fact you still obviously have a rank structure, but it's it's definitely just kind of our culture as to how we kind of, I've seen coach people do that.
It's really, I find this really insightful and interesting from someone who's got, when you two both have RAF background, etc. From someone who has this no military background, no flying background, to my perception of pilots in particular, and it's been dispelled massively here. It's not bad, Patrick, don't worry. But my perception is that, what you've just described is vulnerability, is ongoing continuous improvement, reaching for feedback. And all I've literally heard, I think, in the last 20 minutes we've been talking, is feedback loop after feedback loop after encouraged feedback loop, iteration of process, iteration of system, way of working. And for me, I'm like, well, this is kind of music to our ears when we're working with a leadership team or a group of new leaders or a business that's looking to scale really fast. A lot of the time, the systems or the processes, they've kind of just become. There's been some funding or product market fit in the business environment, and they've done, right, well, this is the quickest way we think we can do this now. We're 50 people. Then all of a sudden, before they know it, they're 250 people or 1,000 people, and they're still using the same way of leadership or the same way of team working or the same way of decision making. And so I think there's a real value here for our clients and the people listening to the podcast, that actually I'm really like quite intrigued by the amount of continuous feedback and the way that you iterate. So I have a question off the back of that thought process. And the question is, it sounds like there's a big emphasis on the briefing. Then you go and fly, and then you debrief. What's the ratio, do you think, in terms of time spent in the air versus time spent briefing and preparing and time spent debriefing?
So today, for instance, we were taking off at, say, 9 o'clock. We started briefing at 8:15. We briefed for about 20 minutes. And what we'll do is we'll talk through the whole display. So we'll literally say from positioning crowd rear, start full, and the boss is red one. He'll do all these kind of radio commands, and we will kind of talk about what our errors were on the last trip, how we fixed that. So that could have been, I turned a little bit too late, I need to go early with my turn, because that late turn probably in the wrong position or whatever it might be. And we'll talk through the whole display from literally start to finish, the takeoff to landing, and then we'll walk out to the jets, get in them, start them up maybe 15 minutes before takeoff, taxi out, take off, maybe fly for 30 minutes, land, come back in, and then we'll watch in real time that whole process. So the whole display back through. So you could be in that debrief for 45 minutes, a debrief in the half hour I've just done. And that's the same for the front line. You could have maybe flown for an hour 45 on the front line mission, maybe longer, but you could then spend potentially 3-4 hours then pulling apart what you've just done to work out why. And you could get to the final part of the mission, and actually you can take that mistake at the final part of the mission all the way back to the start of the mission. That's just something that maybe has gone wrong in the brief or the plan, and work out why, so that the next time it doesn't happen. So yeah, we're spending quite a lot of time doing the debrief, but again, we're trying to be succinct with what we're saying in the debrief. We're not really kind of trying to waffle on or talk too long. We're trying to kind of pick out the bits so we can move on, because we do it 3 times a day. So that whole process, by the time you've started, I think, so this morning we started at 7:15, sorry. So our first takeoff was kind of 8:15, and then you do that 3 times. Before you know it, it's 3:30, and then you've got other stuff to do potentially. So it's, you have to get through it relatively quickly, but again, trying to pick out the big points, which again is that kind of self-critical part of the debrief, which is really important. So
almost seems like the actual flying is probably like 20% of what you do, and the planning and the debrief is almost 80%, which is probably 180 out to quite a few businesses. 80% is the product or the service that they're offering or deploying, and then 20% is probably the debrief or the post-project analysis and just seeing what they could do better.
Yeah.
But it's rarely that people have the capacity to do it. So it's great to hear that you force yourselves to have that.
It's an interesting one, because I've probably done I've done a fair bit of work with sales organizations on sales enablement work, and this ties in so closely with the tech that the kind of sales people use nowadays to record Teams calls and Zoom calls, and you can use plugins now to understand emotional responses from people on sales calls. We're not doing this to you now, Patrick. It's okay. But when we analyze and work with those businesses that have a higher success in terms of the amount of effort they put in, or the amount of calls or meetings, and the return on that investment, it's not a mistake. I don't think that the teams that practice more and do those, briefings and debriefings, or pre-mortems and post-mortems, as some businesses we've worked with have called them, they get better success because they iterate their performance, and it kind of marries onto that high performance kind of process that you've talked about just there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've worked out that Paddy's part of the Red Arrows, but it'd be great to hear actually how you ended up on the Red Arrows. I think we dove straight into a pretty deep line of questioning. It'd be great to hear how you ended up speaking to us today. You've alluded that you're part of the Red Arrows, the display team. How did you end up flying with them?
So for me, it kind of started when I was 18. So I went off to uni, and I always had interest in the RAF. And so a friend of mine said, if you're keen on the RAF, join the University Air Squadron. So I went off and joined the UAS, and it was then kind of everyone who joined got to learn to fly, and I never really thought I would kind of end up kind of in the RAF as a pilot. And they got to my second year and they said, if you want to stay for a third year, you have to apply for a bursary. So I went for a bursary. I was fortunate to get a pilot bursary in my final year, and then joined the RAF in 2006 with yourself, obviously, same flight on the same day. And then, I kind of obviously did the officer training, finished that in March 07. Finished my flying training, my basic training. I was lucky enough to get street fly fast jets. Went to fly to Carlo the Hawk, then went off to fly the Tornado GR4, spent 4 years flying that. Then became an instructor for 2 years, teaching back on the Hawk T1, on the team now. Then I went to fly the Eurofighter Typhoon for 5 years, and I was an instructor on that. And then, I was fortunate to get in the Reds in 2021. So I've actually been applying for a few years, and I got my first chance at kind of the selection in 2019. Did get in, but COVID, there was no selection the following year. But then the year after was 20 reopened. I went back for my kind of second go, and I was lucky enough to get in.
Did they tell you why you didn't get in the first time when you managed to get into the team? Was there something specific that they were looking for, or?
No, nothing really. The people who were on the same selection had been before, a few of them. They'd got the experience. But no, there was nothing really kind of said to me that this was the thing to fix. The selection's quite weird. So you spend a week with the team. So we'll have this year's applicants coming out to join us in about 2 weeks in Greece. And you spend the week and you fly in every position within the Reds. So it's quite a tiring week. So you're flying 3 times a day, 5 days a week, which, coming from something like the Typhoon, where you maybe fly every other day, you might fly for 5-6 hours, but the whole kind of getting thrown around the back of the jet again is quite tiring. And then you will basically fly with either Red 8 or Red 9, who are the kind of deputy team leader, kind of the executive officer, and they will basically assess you on a flying test. So at the end of a full practice display, Red 1 will peel away from the formation. Everyone else goes on lands, and you're with, say, Red 8 or Red 9, and you will go off and do your flying test. And they'll basically, Red 8 or 9 gives you control and says, right, Red 1's going to call for the loop. And he always says, pulling up, and you do a loop on his wing. And he does another one. And then he does a barrel roll where he pulls up and he rolls towards you. Do 2 of those. Then he moves you a bit closer again. You do 2 volleys, 2 rolls, and you get no feedback whatsoever. It is literally the guy takes control, and that's it. There's no like, oh, that was really nice, that was really bad, that was middle of the road, just nothing. And again, in that, they're looking for kind of self-critique to say, oh, okay, I think I did that badly, or I'm going to try and work on that and stuff. And so you learn from that, and you just kind of go, well, I don't know how I did, I could have done badly, I could have done well. And then you have a formal interview as well, so you'll sit down with group captain, a wing commander, and a squadron leader, and they will interview you about your career, the team, stuff to do with the strategy of the team, of how it all fits in with the UK's kind of foreign office policy, whatever it might be, loads of different things. And you have to be able to kind of obviously answer all those. And then kind of after all of that, there's obviously a decision process, and you either get in or you don't. So obviously first time I didn't, but then second time, thankfully I did.
I think we need to up our interview game. Well, sounds pretty benign.
Yeah. So how do you find out? Do you get a WhatsApp?
In 2021, when I got in, I was actually eating dinner at home, and it was Tuesday night about 7:30, and I think somehow the decision had been leaked about who'd got in, and so there was a bit of a panic. They weren't going to tell us till a Friday, so we'd got home on the Friday night. Because it was COVID, we were in isolation, so I wasn't allowed to go to work. And on the Saturday, Sunday, they obviously decided who they wanted. They told RAF Manning, so the human resources in the RAF, on the Monday who they wanted, and it's somehow been leaked, because they weren't going to tell us till the Friday. So there was a kind of few urgent phone calls about 7:30 round to people to say, you've got in or you haven't got in. So I remember literally, it was like kind of Peter Kay style, my phone rang, I didn't know the number, and I was like, who's ringing? I was not going to bother answering, but thankfully I did. Yeah, and that was it. Yeah, a bit of a blur for the rest of the night.
So do you think that's like the pinnacle of your career? Were you always striving for that? Was this what you'd always focused on? Or actually, when you're on the Typhoons, I'm sorry, was that the pinnacle of your career back then, and it just keeps shifting? Or
I kind of always wanted to, be in the Reds. It was always kind of my kind of end goal I always wanted to do. But I think like in any job, you'll always have something that you want to achieve the next year. Because I think ultimately, if you have no goal maybe at the end of that, and you kind of go, I felt a little bit like this when I got through flying training. it was always finish flying training, get to the end of flying training. And I know you kind of talk about these kind of, the kind of the false summit, and it was a little bit like that with flying training. I was like, get to the end of flying training, and I kind of got to the end, and I was a bit, well, I've finished flying training now. I'm on the front line. I don't really know what my next kind of thing is, and so it was a little bit like that. So I think, yeah, if you don't have something that you're kind of aiming at, it kind of makes it a little bit more difficult, maybe to mold what you, because before you know it, you don't have a goal for that year, and then you finish that year and you think, I've wasted all this chances I could have maybe done courses or whatever it might be to help me, and then you get to the end of that tour. And that's what I tried to say to the junior guys who were on Typhoon. I said, if you can do all you can do now, when you get to the end of your 3 years, your first thing you'll have is more options, because you'll hopefully giving yourself more avenues to go down. If you do nothing, you'll get there and think, I wish I'd done X, Y, and Z. And then when the RAF says you're going to work here, you won't really have any kind of argument, because you can't, well, I don't have the kind of qualifications to not go there, kind of thing. So I always kind of almost say to them, you can shape your own kind of destiny. It's a lot better than being on the back foot and getting sensible that you don't want to go.
I think that ties in really nicely to one of the 3 questions that I had for you. I know we've just covered an awful lot of questions, but it relates back to, you mentioned self-critique and how important it was, especially for your test flight or for your interview test flights. In terms of that self-leadership, self-critique comes into it, and this will probably help aspiring pilots or anyone who wants to end up in the Reds, but also looking at high-performing businesses and teams. How important is self-leadership, do you think, in terms of how you operate on a daily basis, but also within a high-performing team like the Reds? So that element of self-leadership.
I mean, on a daily basis, obviously, I'm in a formation, I'm led by someone else, but probably there's still that kind of discipline to go away and, because again, the debrief is quite short and you have to get kind of everything done. There's still definitely stuff that you have to go away and self-discipline to go away and say, okay, I'm going to read up on this now, because I know last time I did it, I didn't really know much about it. And I think the way I kind of always often thought that on the front line was, if I was in a brief or a debrief, if I knew there's something that I didn't want to be asked, I'd normally try and go away and at least have a read of that subject afterwards, because you kind of sit through the brief or the debrief thinking, I hope it doesn't ask me that. I hope it doesn't ask me that, because I'm not really that confident with that. And it turns out that most people probably aren't either, but if you can kind of go away and go, okay, well, I'm going to read that and just maybe then come back and try and steer the conversation to that subject, show that I read it maybe. But yeah, so that's kind of self-discipline and kind of your self-leadership to go away and kind of, make sure that, you are kind of obviously doing things, be disciplined with yourself, because it's very easy to go away and just sit down and not do that. And again, that's something we always try to say to the more junior guys on the squadron as well.
I think that's a big difference between business and the military as well. And I always try and bring up war stories, as it were, about the importance of checklists, and then for businesses like terms of reference and having that in place, job specs, terms of reference, those checklists, so that exactly when the pressure does build up and you find yourself in a challenging scenario, actually you've put in the effort, that self-leadership to go away and practice the little things that you find challenging, but also make sure that you know your checklists, or you know your terms of reference, or how to conduct your job to the minute detail is so important, and something that we try and get across from our backgrounds that quite often businesses don't have in place. And it's only when they really push for that high performance stage, or they find themselves in quite challenging times, then the cracks appear, because they haven't spent that time going away, getting the small things done to the best of their ability. I've got a goose story that I always bring up about the E3 when one of my colleagues hit a goose, but it wasn't a critical failure of the aircraft in the end. There were no fatalities because everyone had the job to do. Everyone trusted each other to do that job and knew that they'd spent that time, as you said, going through the checklists, because they didn't want the embarrassment of not knowing it in front of their peers, but also in a life or death situation, they could be trusted to carry out that checklist to the best of their ability.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think from what you just said, that really reiterates what we try and implore.
I can't believe you got the goose story in.
I had to, just for those.
Honestly, Patrick, this goose pops up in every.
Oh, really?
I can be running, I can be facilitating a leadership session, and the goose will just pop up because Ben's been using that deck before, and I don't have the goose story, so it just I'm like just move on. But goose aside, there's one bit that resonated for me massively in what you said, which was if you're in a meeting. I mean, you talked about being in a debrief and not wanting to be asked about that topic, and then going away and look at and making sure that you were prepped for the next time that came up. And I think for me, that's a really big self-leadership lesson. Like if you are a manager or a leader and you're running a team meeting or a team kickoff in your business, and someone asks you that question that you kind of bluff your way through a bit, I think that model of self-leadership is then right. I need to take note of that. I need to go away and make sure that I'm ready for that the next time. And I think that's a really good message for people listening.
Yeah, I agree. And following on from that, I was going to ask, well, the question we normally ask our guests is, what's the most high-performing team you've been a part of? And I think I pretty much know the answer, unless actually you've been part of another high-performing team that wasn't the Reds, that you're going to change it. But moving on from that, I think, do you have three things that you could identify as to why the Reds are so high-performing or perform so highly? There are three things that stand out. I think trust is probably one of them from what you're saying. Is there another two that just in your own words, just three words that we could take away?
Trust. Obviously, two words, but kind of trying to get self-critique. So it's, always kind of looking at yourself, as to, instead of pointing the finger at other people first, is kind of saying, actually, was that my fault, and why? And then the other kind of one that kind of obviously links into that, really underpins it, is in the honesty. So an honest debrief is what we are always looking for. So people will be able to say, yes, I did that. Because the biggest thing as well, and that goes back onto the front line as well, because if, you won't necessarily have all the time, it's like I said earlier on, to watch someone's tape of their recording. Sound Typhoon, it would record all their sensors and systems. And ultimately, if they're lying to you about something, and then you happen to watch that tape and see that they weren't telling the truth about what happened, include that, then straight away that trust is gone, and that person's probably going to have to be monitored more closely. So clearly the trust, the self-critique, and the honesty is the three things. I think that when people come and watch us brief and debrief, and we have corporate visitors, that's the kind of thing we always try and show, and that hopefully they take away to their business. It's just is all a part of it, is the honest thing. And I know that from the outside, when we have other pilots, who are in the RAF can fly with us, do find, I think sometimes think we're a bit critical, we're a bit harsh to each other, but it's nothing. It's never personal. So in the debrief, we only call each other by a number. So in the debrief, they'll only refer to me as number 5. They won't say my actual name. And what we're trying to do is ultimately, once that debrief is finished, then it's stopped. You can still talk about stuff about the trip, but you're basically trying to obviously almost depersonalize that debrief and pull that away, just because you're trying to look for, again, the safety critical things and the things that's going to make the formation better. And that's the same on the front line as well. So once you step out of that mission debrief, you might have not been necessarily, you're say not nice to each other, but you're always trying to be, there's clearly a difference between bullying someone and being constructive, but you always try to be constructive with people and try and work out why things happened and how they fix that. But once you step out of the debrief, then, a lot of the time, you are back to being friends again in the crew and having a chat, because it could be that actually the person you just debriefed is actually a higher rank than you, because you are more qualified on the aircraft and they are newer. So so they're kind of the three things really: that trust, that self-critique, and the honesty. And those three things kind of go hand in hand as to what we do here on the Reds, and how we try and make ourselves as best as we can be throughout the the training and the display season. This training the brief and debrief doesn't stop throughout the year. So even when we get our qualification to display in a few weeks, we'll always still brief and debrief every show and look at what happened, why it happened, and how to make that show better. And that's always done. And no matter what it is, it could be a 3 or 4 displays in a day we're doing, and no matter what, we will always debrief and talk about our previous display and watch the video if we can as to what happened in that display and how we make it better.
I think we're aligned in what we practice and preach and tell our clients in terms of that trust and honesty. One of the questions that always come back is, but how do you get that trust in the very first instance? So when you dig into those sort of 5 whys or the root cause, how do you build that trust when you get a new team member? And then the next question that comes up is, should we give our trust 100% to that person, or should we allow it to be earned? And I think just to round off this little line of questioning, when you join the team, do you think your peers, colleagues, the bosses Do they trust you 100%? You get into that jet and they trust you, or do you have to prove yourself over the training trips and training sorties in the work up to the display? How do you feel when you join the team? Are you trusted, or do you have to earn their trust?
Yeah, I think you are trusted to a certain extent. And clearly, what they might not have as much trust or confidence in is you flying a maneuver, because you haven't really flown it much before. So understandably, when you're learning something, it might take a little bit of time to get that. So, for instance, Red 3 was the new guy this year, and I fly outside of him. So he's moving around all over the place. Then I might not trust that he's going to hold those errors. And so I might sit a little bit further away than I would do now, for instance, because I've flown on his wing a lot more. I can trust that if he does something slightly out of position, he's going to hold that error. I'm not going to widen out into me. So that trust is clearly there, I think, when you start, but it obviously grows throughout the training season. And it kind of goes, again, back to our selection. So when we select people, we'll have seen all their reports from ever since they joined the RAF. So you can start to make out, what someone's character is like, whether or not they are kind of, an individual that would fit in necessarily within a team in terms of trust, or whether or not we, you might think, actually, this person, they're, a brilliant pilot, may not be the person for this team. Not because we don't like them, just because actually that person may himself put their hands up and say, do you know what, after seeing the process, I don't want to be a part of this, or whatever it might be. So yeah, there's definitely the trust there when you start, but it just grows throughout the season, and then it will just keep growing and growing and growing. It's kind of, we've all got the kind of same common goal, which is having a safe and thrilling display for the public.
Nice, thanks so much for that. I think, and you alluded to this earlier on in terms of the support crew, the engineers and I think you call them the circus, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, for the people at home and listening that might not necessarily have direct reports or might not necessarily be in a leadership role, actually followership is going to be really important in terms of becoming a high-performing team or maintaining that high performance. And that'd be just really interesting as the last sort of question to hear from you, your response. Do you think you make a good follower being on the team? Do you have to be a good follower? And do you have any examples of where actually you might not be a leader, actually you've concentrated on that followership and that's been critical to the high performance of the team? Or back on your operational tools as well, being a follower?
Yeah, I think, definitely, I think everyone, and that's the thing, the way the RF works, you're training, you remember from officer training, you train, say, 100 officers, technically all be told you are the leader. But then it's like, well, there's only, say, 4 teams that maybe on that squadron, so you can't have 100 leaders trying to lead 4 teams. You have to have people who, can follow sometimes, and they'll clearly be better leaders than there'll be other people. We all see, I think, people in everyday walk of life where you think that guy's a natural leader, just without even doing anything, he could just lead anyone around. And but at the same time, you need to be able to follow someone. And it's the same in the front lifeline we do. You might have a full ship of Typhoons going out, and normally what you'd have in that is you'd have your number 1 aircraft, which has got your formation leader. He's called the full ship leader. Then number 2 might be a junior guy. Number 3 might be a senior guy who's leading the back pair, and number 4 might be a junior guy. But you could also then end up with a situation where you've got a newly qualified leader, and I'm obviously a qualified leader as well, but I'm just further down the back of the formation. Now, I could probably see a situation arise where I think I wouldn't do it that way, I would do it this way, but at the same time, that new leader's got to lead and learn how to lead as well. So it's not just jumping in and saying, okay, well, I'm going to do it this way, I think you're wrong straight away, which I've seen people do straight away. As soon as something goes slightly off course, they're jumping in, and then the guy for the rest of the time or girl is just reactive leadership, because they know that the more experienced person is going to pipe in when they need to. And that can lead to kind of safety critical situations happening. So it's that kind of followership in that situation on the front line sort is where you have to sometimes just say, okay, I'm not going to step in here unless it's safety critical. I'm not going to step in. I'm going to let this person find out their own way of leading. And then in the debrief as well, look at why that happened. And if they can't find that, you try and steer them back to why it happened. And it could go all the way back to the plan where they briefed something slightly wrong, and it went, all their mission was built on that foundation, which is wrong. And again, and it's, you can stop it in the plan maybe, but again, if you're trying to bring something out, you can maybe let things go a little bit further. But it's, it's that followership to kind of, in that situation, to say, okay, I'm going to let someone do it. But then it's also followership where, I might be a less qualified person, but I'm not going to, we probably all know these people who straight away try and chip in with, or get quite moody because they're not in the lead or their plan's not being, implemented. And it's kind of been able to, in that situation, step back and say, okay, I might not agree with the way they do, but I'm going to be a good follower because we've all got the common goal, which is, whatever that mission might be to get from A to B, we're all in that together. And if we don't work as a team, then we're not going to get to B and the mission will fail. So it's kind of in all that situation, and then again, because we have the debrief where people all get their say. So in that debrief, I can then, at an appropriate time, say, actually, could we have done it this way? And then we will be looking and going, yes, that would have worked, or no, that was a bad idea. And then I think I'm glad I didn't say it. So, and again, it's that whole culture where people can say, how about this? And then you can kind of I'll take your opinion on board, but in this situation, we have to just go with, option one for whatever reason. So, yeah, there's lots of times where being a good follower is clearly key. And it's knowing when and when not to be a good follower sometimes. And times where, as you probably saw, maybe safety critical times where you think, I can see things going wrong. And if I don't say anything, will I get kind of told off not to say anything? So I might say something. I might sound like a bit of an idiot and it might be wrong, but at least I've hopefully given, an input.
At least you've said it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I said it so many times, it's that whole culture of just not being afraid to put your hand up and say, how about this? And it's obviously knowing when, but yeah, just allowing people to maybe have the kind of confidence to put their hand up and not be scared of, saying, how about we do this break as well?
Yeah, there's lots of keywords coming out there that people can resonate with. So the common goal, trust, honesty, having the belief in themselves and the confidence. So it's good to hear that you've mentioned all of those, and we haven't asked you to say that as well, which is great to hear. So yeah, imparting that back to the businesses that are listening too.
Yeah, and I think that comes full circle. Like your description and definition there of followership comes back to kind of question one, which was like, in one sentence, how would you describe your philosophy ethos around leading people? And you said, very succinctly and very quickly, it was about treating people as you would want them to treat you. And I think you've just kind of emulated that back in the followership piece as well. Actually, if you wanted someone to help, if you wanted to learn, you'd want someone to give you some space to learn. And bar there being anything, catastrophic that's going to happen because of your actions, often we learn best from having a go and failing and doing that, getting that feedback loop. So I think that ties in really nicely, Patrick. Thank you. Before we let you go to enjoy the rest of your evening, we've got our final question. So this is our West Peak question. So we named West Peak for a reason. There are several mountains that have false peaks or second summits, and the summits, they look like the peak, the goal, the objective. And when a tired mountaineer reaches them and sees the real peak that is obscured, they kind of feel a bit deflated because they realize they've got so much more to achieve. And we think this translates directly into skill acquisition in business, sport, and life, where someone learns a little bit. We then try and apply it in the real world, and we go, wow, like that bit I know is a tiny little piece of a much bigger picture. And people can get deflated. And we think for us, that's when people need coaching support, supportive mentors, etc., to be able to help them kind of get through that conscious incompetence bit or conscious micro competence maybe. So my question to you is, we ask all of our guests, can you recall and describe a West Peak moment in your career to date?
Yeah, so for me, really, it's kind of, there's been a few, but the one that stands out recently is the training we do with the Reds. So you join the team, you get requalified in the Hawk, and then you kind of start a 3 aircraft doing loops and rolls, and then you add a 4th aircraft, 5th aircraft. You start building up the display, and it becomes a bit of a slog, the winter training, because you're just learning stuff, and then you kind of get taught everything, and you kind of taught it all by March time, and you think, yes, I'm down there, everything. And it's like kind of like the first kind of, you think, oh, there's the top, there's the end, I've been taught everything. And then you come on this, the spring training, and it's the realization that there's so much more to, not to necessarily learn about the display, but the polish to put on that display to make that display, to get to the next peak. And it's, as a second year pilot on the team now, with the first year pilots we've got now, they've kind of experienced that a few times over the past couple of months, where they kind of think we've kind of got to a certain stage, and then they get taught something new, and it's like, oh, okay, well, like we're just one step further again, and then they kind of get taught something new again, and it's one step further. And it's kind of again, trying to remind them about, okay, in a few weeks' time, you'll have your red suit, you'll be displaying around the UK, flying over London for the coronation. There's it's kind of that end goal. And the feelings that I felt actually here as well, saying to them, this is normal to feel this way when you feel a bit deflated at the end of the day, where the missions haven't gone very well. You've been, you've picked yourself up for so many kind of mistakes, whatever, and just thinking you're not getting it. It's kind of that, you got to that first peak, and the next one, kind of the final one, is in sight. But yeah, there's definitely so many times when you go through the training on the team that you think, oh, I'm just about near the top, and then you get something else gets thrown at you, and you realize that it's not quite there. And then even when you think you've been shown all the the maneuvers that you can do on the team, there's then the kind of final peak, which is putting the polish on it all to make it a real symmetrical, smooth, accurate flying display, which takes so long, and we're still not even there yet. So we're hopefully in a few weeks' time we're there. But this is, we've been here a week, and we've been, we've gone from, the standard at the start of the week last week, which wasn't great, to now already within a week of, so much further on. But we're still, not quite at that peak yet. We're still a few weeks away from it, I think, at the moment. But hopefully, it's kind of starting to appear, just about. But
brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you for your time. I know you've taken an hour or so out of recovery time, and probably some debrief learning time as well. We've learned loads. I know it's been good for you and Ben to connect again. And I think so much of what you've talked about and what you shared from your career today and your experience, it really lands in the world of business, and hopefully some of our listeners who are aspiring or emerging leaders or leaders of teams and businesses can take something away from, I think, the cyclical feedback nature, the honesty, the communication, and the trust, I think, has come out time and time again.
Yeah, I think it's really going to be like affirmational, that the things that they thought they need to be doing but probably aren't assigning the time that they should be. Actually, we can hear that almost the best team in the world are assigning that sort of 80% to what goes on before the flights and after as well, to create such a high-performing team. Yeah, so thank you. It's been a great insight, really interesting, and great to see you again after all this time.
Hello.
Yeah, I hope you have a great rest of the evening, and look forward to seeing you, no doubt, over the skies around the UK sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the How They Lead podcast.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode and learned something new about the world of high performance.
If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
And don't forget to subscribe to the How They Lead podcast on your favourite platform so you never miss an episode.
Until next time, keep pushing yourself to reach your full potential and evolve the way you perform.
And remember, just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean doing it a new way can't work.